On the night of the 25th of November 1120, two ships sat in the port at Barfleur, Normandy, both ready to set sail for England. There was celebration in the air and much drinking. The first ship was carrying the King of England, Henry. The second, a new larger vessel, carried Henry's 17-year-old son and heir to the crown. Only one would arrive in England. The fate of the other would cause dynastic and political ruptions that would last the next 30 years. This is the doomed story of the White Ship, the disaster that led to a total wiping out of a generation of English aristocracy and would eventually sink England into civil war. Despite becoming king, Henry was never meant to rule. As the third son of William the Conqueror, he would not inherit England or Normandy, and it was perhaps expected Henry would go into the clergy. With this in mind, he was educated well and taught to read during his youth. When William I died in 1087, as was the tradition, he left England to his second son, William Rufus, and Normandy to his eldest son Robert, known as Curthose, with Henry receiving a sum of £5,000. He spent many years travelling around England and Normandy, embroiled in political and military battles with his brothers, at times taking one side over the other. In the year 1100, Henry accompanied his brother William on a hunting trip in the New Forest, along with a retinue of Norman nobility. The sources are uncertain on what exactly happened next, but all agree that William was shot and killed by an arrow. Knowing time was of the essence, Henry rode straight to Winchester, where he hoped to be crowned king. He claimed porphyrogeniture, that he was the only son born to William the Conqueror during his reign as king. Therefore he, Henry, had more of a right to the crown than his older brother Robert. Henry had prominent men at his side, and he was swiftly crowned in Westminster Abbey 3 days later. The swiftness with which Henry was crowned gave Robert little chance of staking his own claim. He was at the time away in Jerusalem taking part in the First Crusade. On his return, he discovered what had happened and went to war with Henry. Henry won and became, like his father before him, ruler of both England and Normandy. The next decade passed with some element of peace, at least compared to the prior decade. In 1115, Henry began to think of succession. His son William Aethling would become King of England upon his death, but the succession of the Duchy of Normandy was not so secure. King Louis VI of France favoured Robert Curthose's son, William Clito, to the heir of Normandy. The result was years of battle, and it wasn't until 1120 that an agreement was eventually struck. William Aethling gave homage to Louis. In return, Louis recognised him as the heir of the Duchy of Normandy. Fresh from settling affairs in Normandy, Henry was intent on crossing the Channel to England to reward the knights who had fought so bravely for him. His intention was to award feudal baronies to these men, thus raising their status. Those returning to England were to rendezvous at Barfleur, a coastal town on the tip of Cotentin, situated on the thumb-like peninsula that signals in the direction of southern England. The shoreline envelops Barfleur, making it the perfect natural harbour for medieval mariners. During ancient times, it became the ideal crossing point for traders of iron and tin, and it had remained the favoured path across the Channel. Henry's retinue, arriving at Barfleur, comprised many of the warriors in his kingdom, as well as a number of clerics, churchmen, lords, and courtiers alongside some of their wives and daughters. Some of the highest-ranking nobles in Henry's land would accompany him to England, including his heir, William Aethling. Henry treated William in the traditional stereotype of the adored, spoiled eldest son, pandered to by all around him, which made him prone to periods of arrogance. The chronicler William of Malmesbury wrote that there was a buzz of excitement around the young heir, almost all the young nobility flocking around him from similarity of youthful pursuits. They were trying to court favour with the boy who would one day become king. All the extravagance of kingship was bestowed upon William, and he appeared as king in all but name, according to Henry of Huntingdon, dressed in the finest silk clothing. Alongside William were several of Henry's other children, including two of his eldest illegitimate sons, Robert Fitzroy and Richard of Lincoln, accompanied by his illegitimate daughter, Matilda, Countess of Perche. With them, Henry's cousin and grandson of the Conqueror, Stephen of Blois, Richard the Earl of Chester, and numerous other cousins, nobles, and royal officials. It was only fitting that they travel in style. The king was petitioned by Thomas FitzStephen, who Orderic Vitalis states was the grandson of Erard, who had contributed a longship to William the Conqueror's fleet that had crossed the Channel in 1066. The man wished to honour his grandfather by leading King Henry's vessel across the sea to Southampton. Hearing this, Henry agreed to let the man sail across, stating, "I entrust you to my sons William and Richard, whom I love as my own life." This precious cargo was to be carried in a large vessel, said to be capable of carrying several hundred passengers along with 50 crew. It was long and deep, with decorative carvings on the prow and stern. It was driven by a large mast and square sail, with oar holes on each side. The rudder was not in the usual place, however, being on the right-hand side of the vessel rather than central. This meant the captain was blind on the port side, so had to pay close attention while sailing. Orderic Vitalis describes it as excellently fitted out and ready for royal service. Late November was one of the worst months of the year to attempt a channel crossing. The waters were icy, and in sub-freezing temperatures, any mistake would be lethal. On this night, there was a fair wind from the south, making for rapid crossing. At some point in the evening, King Henry's ship set sail, leaving the younger generation behind to enjoy themselves. It was long past dark when the white ship looked like it was leaving. Those on board had got themselves into a drunken state, and when 3 priests arrived to bless the ship with holy water, they were waved away with laughter and insults. That drunken arrogance would spill over into the crew when FitzStephen announced his ship was the fastest, and he would soon catch up with the king. Just before it set sail, Stephen of Blois disembarked due to a bout of diarrhea, which would save his life. Around midnight, the white ship departed Barfleur and headed for England. William of Malmesbury wrote how the ship flew swifter than the winged arrow, sweeping the rippling surface of the deep. But speed would not be enough. The ship never made it out of Barfleur harbour. "It was dark and the light was not good," wrote Wace. The sailors had been drinking and had not worked out the correct course. Just minutes after departure, a shocking screech filled the night air. The white ship had crashed into a rocky outcrop now known as Quillebeuf, impaling her port side. Water gushed through the deep gash, and sailors attempted to push the ship clear of the rocks. This did more harm than good. More and more water gushed into the ship, and men were swept away to their deaths. As more water filled the ship, she became heavier, until finally, Wace wrote, she split completely and floundered. As the ship tipped over, the passengers were thrown into the dark, icy waters. Their screams were heard a mile away, back at Barfleur. Those who heard the screams assumed they were shouts of revelry from a ship of people having the time of their lives. In the panic, William Aethling's guards thought of nothing but his safety. They managed to launch the white ship's only rowing boat and successfully boarded the young heir, pushing off in the direction of safety, leaving the remaining passengers behind. Berold, a butcher from Rouen, was in the icy water, with screams of the dying ringing around him. Orderic Vitalis wrote, the passengers and crew raised cries of distress, but their mouths were soon stopped by the swelling waves. Then Berold saw part of a broken mast floating in the water and made for it. He managed to pull himself up on top of it and could see the whole scene as it unfolded. Soon another man was next to him, Geoffrey de l'Aigle, one of the King Henry's bravest knights. The pair watched as the head of Thomas FitzStephen, the ship's captain, rose to the surface. "The king's son," he shouted. "What has become of him?" Berold told the captain how William Aethling had been in a boat rowing to safety when he heard the shriek of his half-sister Matilda, crying out that he should not abandon her so barbarously. And in an act of chivalry, William ordered the boat to turn round and go back for her. The boat passed by many of the remaining passengers who were still desperately flapping in the water. As the boat passed, they attempted to climb aboard, so many in fact that the last remaining boat capsized and plunged all on it to their deaths. Upon hearing this news, FitzStephen realized even if he were to survive, he would be held to blame for the disaster. He uttered his final words, "It is in vain for me to go on living," and sank into the waters, never to be seen again. Now the water was silent. Only the sound of the laboured breathing of the two men could be heard. Geoffrey managed to cling to the mast for several hours, but his clothing, being of the finer sort of silk materials, could not provide enough warmth, and he slipped into the water, most probably due to hypothermia, becoming food for the monsters of the deep. Only Berold survived to tell the tale, his humble peasant clothing saving his life, layers of wool keeping him warm enough to be spotted by fishermen the following morning. Safely ashore, he told the people of Barfleur what had occurred. Search parties were sent to the wreckage to salvage the king's treasure and the bodies of those dead, but not one corpse was found on the ship. Many were washed ashore or found near rocks, but not that of the future King of England and Normandy. He was never found. As Henry of Huntingdon wrote, "The head that should have worn the crown of gold was dashed against the rocks." Almost 300 dead, but to King Henry, only one of those 300 mattered, his son and heir, William. Those who had made their way to England to give news of the tragedy were apprehensive of telling the king. He was a fearsome man who would not take the news well. First to learn the news were those at court who had also lost loved ones. Orderic Vitalis wrote of the deep mourning and countless tears shed. It finally fell to Henry's nephew, Theobald of Blois-Chartres, to break the news. But having lost family in the disaster himself, and fearing the reaction of his formidable uncle, he persuaded a young boy to go and tell the king. The boy, in a fit of tears, threw himself at the king's feet and delivered the terrible news. Henry fell to the floor, screaming in agonizing grief and disbelief. Now that the king knew, all the people of the realm could give rein to their tears, wrote Orderic Vitalis, and this mourning lasted for many days. Eventually, the king would remarry in an attempt to sire another son, an heir to his kingdom. However, he died sonless, leaving the kingdom to his daughter, Matilda, Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. This would cause a civil war, an anarchy, or to give it the contemporary description, a shipwreck, between her and the man who survived the White Ship disaster because of diarrhea, Stephen of Blois. The anarchy will be a topic of a future video. Of the White Ship disaster and what followed, William of Malmesbury wrote, "No ship was ever productive of so much misery to England." Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video.